Okay, folks, good afternoon. This is Gary Bender from CFO Solution here with Paul Siegert, and we're both happy to bring you another hour with two topics. The first topic, we're going to talk about a safety culture and why the CFO should be involved. The second one is preparing for an exit and how not to get blindsided and how to survive it and actually perhaps prosper in an exit sale of a company. So, Paul, if you can watch the chat, I can focus on slides and stay on time. So let's talk about safety, folks. Every company talks about employees are our greatest assets, yet we know how to change the oil in a company truck, but we don't know how to manage the assets called employees. But so I'll come back to, or I'll start with, why must I be involved in safety? Why is it my job? Okay, well, CFO is always responsible wherever risk and resources and returns intersect. It is the financial executive's job. Keep in mind that we actually understand how to measure and analyze everything. So in safety, and this is true for everything. What are the goals? How are we doing against goals? Do we have action plans? Do we have the right people working on it in this situation, the safety committee? And finally, what does it really cost us? What are we getting out of it? How can we improve?
Hey, Gary.
Yes.
If you're showing a slide, I'm not seeing it. Just heads up on that.
Oh. Thank you.
Yep.
Let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Can you bring up your slides?
I can.
Bring them up that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So keep rolling and I'll catch up to you with the slides.
Okay, so we just talked about, I'm sorry about that, folks. If you're trying to watch the slide and you have Paul's face instead, that's we'll do better. Okay, so in a smaller company, your plant manager or HR, or maybe even the owner of the company, is responsible for safety. In a larger company, you might have an EH&S or a safety manager managing it, but I'm still going to contend very strongly that finance has to be involved, strongly involved, because again, we have a perspective none of those people have, even the owner/CEO. We understand cost and risk. We understand exposures and risks. We know how to do analysis, and we also can calculate and anticipate the strategic impact of a safety disaster or a great safety program. I started this off by saying our employees are our greatest assets, but can each of you on here tell me how you're doing year to date on tracking injuries, near misses, lost time, the claims we've had, the reserves you have on your books related to accidents? I'm going to guess most of you can't. And I can tell you that 10 years ago, I couldn't do that very well. If I had to do a safety presentation or had to update the board, I had to scramble and run around to try to capture this information. I decided it's my job to understand this. Just like I understand backlog and prospects and what's going on in the sales area and what's going on in operations with overtime and absenteeism and late vendors, I decided I had to understand safety and the impact on the company. I also recommend that the company leadership, so operating managers and your internal management team, leadership team, as well as the board of directors, should know this, and that it's the role of the CFO to communicate this in a regular and consistent manner. So to do that, again, we're anal retentive, we're numerical. It would be obvious that we could start off with a table of lost time injuries, near misses, recordables, basically mimicking the OSHA 300 and 301 form. I'll digress for a second. If your company has to file an OSHA 300 and 301 form every year, if that's being filed without your review, shame on you, shame on your company, because frankly, those numbers are what's driving your compensation or your workers' compensation premiums. They're what the outside world can see. If you have somebody who doesn't understand safety, doesn't understand reporting, doesn't understand the arithmetic involved in calculating a rate for every 200,000 man hours worked. Those are the measures that are used across the country. You have to do it correctly. So first recommendation today is, whether you have a safety committee or not, get involved in the OSHA 300, 301 filings, make sure the records are complete, make sure the files are complete at each lost time accident. We'll take it. Another best practice is make sure you're seeing your quarterly loss reserves and claim expense from your insurance broker. They should be providing that report to you quarterly. A good broker should be reviewing it with you and working to reduce the reserves, close out claims, get people back to work. Again, we can't trust HR to do it. We can't trust the supervisor to do it. They don't understand it. They don't deal with it. They don't understand all the implications, both legally and financially, of getting people back to work and closing claims and getting carriers and brokers to do their jobs. So with that basic information understanding and that basic reporting you would do to your management team in your board of directors, I suggest that after you provide the basic information, you start to develop the right metrics. And if you come up the OSHA 300 forms, you're going to see rates of accidents for 200,000 man hours. Basically, rates for every 100 employees. That's the history of how they chose that number. So if you have, a ratio of 3, that means you have 3 lost time injuries per year for 100 employees. That is a pretty high rate. You might be in a high risk field construction or manual assembly manufacturing, where 3 may be a good rate, but generally anything more than 2 raises eyebrows. So again, you have your basic information, you have your metrics used by OSHA, which are the incident rate, the recordable rates, and a lost time injury rate. A recordable is when the employee requires first aid treatment. So beyond a Band-Aid, if they're going to the doctors, if they need stitches, if they get tested for a concussion or a fever, or anything beyond visiting the plant nurse or taking a break, laying down for a few minutes, that becomes a recordable. You have to follow the recordable measures, including informing your broker, your carrier, your panel of physicians, etc. Lost time, very clearly, if they can't come to work the rest of the day, if they're sent home, if they're hospitalized, those are obvious lost times. Those are measured by lost term incident rates. And then you're measuring the number of them, i.e. the frequency, and then you're measuring the duration. How many days is each lost time injury this year, and until the person gets back to work. So you can have lost time durations of a year or 2 in a serious disability situation where it destroys your ratios, obviously, but it really just has very, very significant financial impacts and may even lead to OSHA fines or OSHA inspections. Now let's go a step beyond that. So again, I'm assuming everybody in this call can capture that basic information with a little bit of work and putting a process in place. Second part, so I'm assuming you can create and mimic the OSHA 300 form with the data and the ratios. But now I suggest you get into a best practice situation, and that's where you actually create a metric. Call it a KPI, call it a metric. We've developed one in our group and working with other CFOs. This seems to hold water and convey a lot. The cost of safety, and it's cost of safety as a percent of your payroll dollars. So if you have $10 million of payroll, total payroll for your company, you might do it by location, but total payroll for whatever you're measuring, okay? And then that's the denominator. Very easy to find. You can estimate it, you budget it, and you report it. It's on your statements. So total payroll is very easy, okay? The numerator are all of the components that cost you money for safety. So if you look at the slide, The obvious one is what we pay for workers' compensation insurance premiums, then what we've paid for claim expenses, including the reserves. So if you're doing 2021 and you have reserves as of December 31st, you treat those reserves as an expenditure. That's what the broker, that's what the carrier expects it will be. It's probably conservative, but that's the best information you have at year end. I always update this quarterly. So as the claims go up or down, the reserves, the claim is closed, you true up your numbers and keep your metric up to date. You also include the cost of safety training. If you bring in an OSHA trainer, if you bring in a forklift trainer or a welding trainer or a chemical handling trainer, but also included in that cost of safety is if you have 20 employees spending 4 hours in training, that you have 80 hours of wages that go in the numerator as a cost of safety. It's money well spent. You also have the cost of a monthly or quarterly safety meeting. And again, I use 20 employees. So you have 20 hours or 20 or 25 or 30 hours of wages, 6 or 12 times a year into the numerator. And then finally, any other insurance claim, insurance expenses. So it's not hard to figure out your total cost of safety. Now let's go back to my example. If you have a $10 million payroll, likely your workers' comp is $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Okay, if I just had to grab a number, so you have $200,000. It's not hard to believe you'd have $50,000 of other expenses with no claims. So at a minimum, your numerator is $250,000 and your denominator's 10 million in our example. So that's a 2.5% factor. Okay. Now, what if you have $100,000 or $200,000 sets of claims and expenses? All of a sudden, it's not hard to double that rate. And you're going to, so first of all, you have history. You can develop the history for the last 3 or 4 years. You can swag in a 3-year trend model and start to develop an average annual cost of safety. You can also budget to some degree because you have premiums, you have a committee, you have certain typical training costs, and you actually budget for training for safety. So you can actually calculate a going forward metric and then measure against that. Best in class workers' comp safety metrics are less than 0.5% per year. Those are almost unattainable upper quartile rates, but there are firms that get there. It's very common to have 3, 4, 5% of payroll as a cost of safety. Now, if you're in a company where half your costs are payroll, and you have 5% of your payroll costs going to safety, start to ask yourself, my guess is most companies these days might have a bottom line margin of 4, 5, 6% of revenue. So I'm mixing revenue and cost here, but just hang with me. We're all numerical people. You might be affecting the bottom line by having a poor or very good safety record equal to an increase of 5 or 10% in sales. So again, we're talking about how do we manage risks? How do we manage profitability? Managing safety to reduce your risks and reduce the cost of risks. So reducing insurance, using training dollars appropriately, efficiently, you can actually have as much impact on your bottom line as the sales team out there trying to get $1 million of new sales. Those are almost the obvious impacts of why you want to have a safety program and why the CFO needs to be involved in the safety program. Let's talk about, what else you can do. So we talk about, and I'll keep using that example. You had a workers' comp insurance premium of $150,000 or $200,000. If you have no other claims that year, you're probably going to have safety costs of $250,000 to $300,000, again, on a $10 million payroll. However, if and when you have claims, whatever the claim is, so let's say you have a person out for 2 weeks and some medical bills, it's a $2,500 hard cash claim. So you got an injured employee, screwed up their family life, screwed up the department by being out for an employee for a week or two. Obviously, people are talking about it. People are concerned about their coworkers in a good way and in a bad way. They hope the person gets better. They start to think about it, and it's like, why did he get hurt? Why isn't the company doing things? Why don't we have guards? Why don't we have training? Why don't we have an extra guy to help him lift something? Why don't we have the appropriate tools? There's never an upside to an injury. And the facts that the carriers use is if you had a $2,500 claim, it really cost the company $10,000 to $15,000 when you look at lost productivity, paying overtime to other workers, the administrative fee, which quote may not be cash. In other words, you don't get paid more to fill out all the paperwork, and your plant manager doesn't. And you may or may not have lawyers, in-house lawyers or external lawyers involved. But whatever you have as a hard claim, increase by multiples to figure out the total cost of that claim. Now, and that's what we can count. That's what we can count on our fingers, and we can tie to the ledger, and we can make some intelligent estimates about. Now you start talking about what's the impact on that employee, their family, their coworkers, and heaven forbid that there's a fatality involved and it made the newspapers, or the union got involved, or the lawyers got involved. Those happen every day. So again, we come back to our job is to manage costs, risk, resources, and all the implications. A perfect place where the CFO or the controller has to be involved. Let's pivot a little bit. So we've talked about the cost. We've got the cost side. We've alluded to the soft impacts on personnel and families and reputation. Now let's think about some of you folks on the call, do proposals or quals reports when the sales team has to submit a bid, your qualifications report, to try to earn new business, especially if you do business with the government or large firms such as chemical firms, pharmaceutical firms, semiconductor firms that are all very, very safety focused. So all of a sudden they need a safety review as part of a proposal being done by the sales team. I would hope you're involved to make sure that the information they're presenting is correct. And if there's a way to, I'll say manage, you can't see the air quotes, if you can manage that information. So they may ask for a 3-year trend. Your last 3 years, you may be in November or in December, but you haven't filed your OSHA 300 report, but your data as of December 31st. If those 3 years are better than the previous 3-year history, obviously use the more recent 3 years. You're not obligated to file your OSHA 300 on January 1st, but if that data is better, use it. If it's high, if your trend is negative, make sure your sales account exec, your salesperson can explain that. Otherwise, you may be automatically disqualified by procurement when they compare to the other bidders. I'm going to suspect that a lot of the folks on the call don't even look at proposals and quals, and there's a standard package. For all you know, it could be a year or two old. It could be incomplete. Somebody could have calculated it wrong, and you could be getting disqualified from bids without knowing why. So now let's think about it in a strategic manner. The common metric is what's your EMR, what's your experience mod rate. I'm a golfer, so you kind of compare that to par. Okay, so most companies would strive for a 1.0 EMR. In government bids, if your EMR is above 1.5, 1.6, kind of depends what part of the country and exactly what you're bidding on. If you're above 1.6 or 1.7, you're automatically not being considered. They don't tell you that. You just cut back. They're not going to have unsafe contractors and vendors. So your broker can explain your EMR. You get an EMR letter every year that shows your EMR by state. So if you're bidding on work in New Jersey, but your headquarters is in New York, make sure you use the right EMR for that location, for that business unit. For example, if you have a national EMR, but you have a choice to calculate an EMR for your New Jersey factory, Location, use the one that's better. Okay, manage it, manage your EMR. Here's the insightful suggestion we would have is understand the EMRs of who you're competing with. Understand what the incumbents EMR is and other people that are bidding on this job. In bid situations, you frequently know who you're bidding against. Competitive situations, your salespeople know who the incumbent is, and they know who else is likely to bid on this. You can't Google your competitor's EMR, but you can ask your broker to find out the EMRs for your competitors. So where most brokers will take the easy way out and annually give you an EMR letter for your company, you're going to go back and ask them to calculate EMRs for certain states where you're located, where your workforce or your factory is. So they have to do a little more work on that. But then just ask them at the same time, hey, here are my 5 or 6 major competitors. Give me the same information for them. In fact, I want it for the last 3 years. And they're going to grumble a little bit. It's going to take them 15 minutes to get that for each competitor, but you're paying your broker to be your advisor and your partner. Most CFOs don't know that. Most salespeople don't ask. At least find out if you've got an advantage or a disadvantage when it comes to the safety page, the safety section of your proposal. So hopefully that was insightful for you folks and something you hadn't thought of before. Keep in mind, and I'm jaded about this, most brokers won't do any more work than they need to. I'll give you the sidebar example. Paul Siegert's healthcare advisory group, they do a hell of a lot more than they need to because they're your advisor, your partner, not your broker. The broker sees you once a year for a renewal and they don't help you during the year. A good healthcare advisor is there with you constantly, helping you to understand, differentiate, understand the good news and the bad news and the best solutions and best practices. But back to talking about safety. You use process to measure everything else in the company. Most of you don't use process to measure safety. So you measure bid opportunities, how many you bid on, how many you get to the bid stage, and how many you win. So sales uses a process all the time. You guys use that to forecast revenue, labor requirements, cash flow, et cetera. You can do the same thing for safety. Define the roles, define the accountabilities, define the issues you're dealing with. Are you dealing with recordables, near misses, lost time? Are they in distribution or in operations or in welding or assembly or in the laboratory? I mean, gather the information, but do it in a processed manner. In other words, it's not just the CFO's job. It's not just a plant manager's job. Put a team together that's going to understand and be accountable for understanding your safety record and improving it. So you measure, you analyze, you report out, develop the action plans. No different than what you're doing in sales activity or overtime or material usage or yields. Most people, again, don't do it on safety. Because this is new to you, use an advisor. Your broker's not going to be anxious to be involved. Your brokers are salespeople. So we highly recommend you either get your insurance carrier involved because they have advisor experts that will walk your factory floor, look at your data, educate you, help you set up the process, and then quarterly help you monitor, review it, and then you can report it out. If your broker and your carrier are not willing to do that, you need to change to a partner. And we work with advisors around the country. We work with really good carriers and brokers. So you don't have to buy from the guy you play golf with or the guy you go to, who goes to your church. If they're just selling you stuff and not helping you, they're not a good vendor partner. Monitor and report. And we all know what you measure is what improves. So create meaningful reports to the leadership team, create a safety committee that works, empower the safety committee that works, give them the money they need to do training, buy safety equipment, put the guards in place, bring a trainer in, it's money well spent. And document all of this and show it to your carriers and show it to your brokers, show them that you have an actionable, progressive, proactive safety committee, and they might be able to get you with a better carrier and give you the benefit of the doubt when it comes time to raise your premiums or pushback against certain claims. So if you want more information, we have done safety best practice programs. We have spent hours and hours on what I just spent 25 minutes on. We have spent hours and hours in the CFO forum face-to-face group that meets monthly for the last 7 years. Visit the website. And this is what you do for anything we're talking about or anything you're wondering about. Go to the website, go to the upper right-hand corner. You're going to see portals. You're going to open that up and see the PCS portal. Okay. We made it easy. We put the password right there. So just type the password in, and we've just made it easier. We have a table of contents listing that lists about 75 to 100 topics we have covered, but we've got them date ordered, but more importantly, we have them ordered by category. So it's pretty easy to find the safety category and look at 4 or 5 sessions we've done on various parts of safety committees, workers' comp and business insurance, et cetera. If you can't figure that out, pick up the phone and call me. I'm glad to take your calls. And if you want to put it through an email, my email address is pretty simple and it's on the website. So, Paul, do we have anybody in the chat room? Or do you have any questions?
Okay, chat is empty at this time. I had 2 things that came to my mind that I thought I'd share quickly.
Go ahead.
Just being in the industry from the insurance standpoint or the broker standpoint, 70% of these EMRs have errors. And if you're one of the ways to know if you're working with an advisor versus just a broker is that they will audit that. And not surprisingly, lots of those errors work against the client. So it should get audited. And then the other thing that came to mind of a friend of mine, an underwriter friend of mine, told me that less than 20% of the submissions that come in from brokers to the underwriters at the insurers that handle the workers' comp and other things, less than 20% have anything other than the bare bones requirements for the submission. And, they don't have a narrative explaining what's going on at the company, what they've done to mitigate claims in the future that occurred in the past and so on. And those that do have that additional information, those underwriters will discount, and they can discount the premium up to 50% in most states. And they do it.
Those are great ads. I've been through those. Just to digress for 1 second. I joined a company, the workers' comp, the premium costs were sky high. Just to put it in perspective, I gave you the example a few minutes ago. It's a reasonable example. $150,000 to $200,000 premiums for a $10 million payroll. We had 70 employees. We had a $6.5 million payroll. And just the cost of our premiums was $700,000 a year.
Wow.
Okay, unbelievable. Almost just our safety metric was over 10% of payroll. And then we had claims. We were close to 15% of payroll.
Wow.
2 years later, we were at 3%. 4 years later, we were at 2.25%. The company went from a loss to a profit because we put a safety program in place.
Awesome.
Okay, but to your point, they can discount it. I mean, most brokers, when they tell you they're going to, and you know this in the healthcare business, they'll go through the motions to go, we'll take your company to market. We'll put together this proposal. We'll go to bat for you. They're pretty lazy. The odds of them losing your business is 1 in 100. They got to really screw up to fire the incumbent because you're busy and you don't know enough to find the right broker advisor. Okay, and insurances. So they'll do the lazy approach, and they'll go back to somebody that 3 or 4 years ago didn't like your EMR. To your point, the proposal was shoddy, so they just blacklisted you. They'll never bid you again. Broker will come back and say, we went to 4 people, 3 decided not to bid on your business. I guess the market's really tough out there on manufacturers. No, the market's tough on lazy brokers.
Right.
Okay, so your examples were great. Thanks for bringing them up. Take a breath here. Now pivot to a totally different topic, as we always do each month, is preparing for an exit, anticipating an exit. And I'm going to assume that at least half the people in the call kind of parallel the world is about half of us work for privately held, closely held companies, whether it's family members, whether it's 2 or 3 guys that started the business 20, 30, 40 years ago, or their granddad did, something like that. So that's American middle market. There's things going on in a in a founder or a second generation owner CEO's head that maybe you're privy to, maybe you understand what their plans are. But I'm going to suggest, let's say you're not the owner's best friend and confidant, okay? But you do see all the numbers. You understand how much money the owner's taking out of the business. You understand your bank obligations. You understand your CapEx requirements. You've got a pretty good idea for the next 12 to 24 months on revenue, costs, profits, cash flow. I mean, if you don't know those, your successor will figure them out, is the way I like to say that politely. If you're just closing the books and looking in the rearview mirror, you're not functioning as a CFO or even a good controller. You've got to be thinking broader, complementing the ownership. If you've got a board, it's not just reporting the numbers, but it's looking forward with the board, helping the board to think that way. But again, you should be able to sense other soft things going on in the business. If you constantly see your partners not agreeing on things, if you see one partner, and let's make it a terrible case, 50-50 partnership, one wants to retire, one's going through a divorce, one's dealing with an illness of either himself or a family member, or there's just some other agreement, there's an exit coming. Something's going to happen. It's going to be a planned exit, or it's going to be somebody throws in an offer. Somebody just decides to settle all this and we're just going to sell the company, especially if they don't have partner agreements in the event of here's the way these are solved. So if you have the agreements, and you should be privy to those for buy-sell agreements between partners. You can always use the divorce as the easiest one to look at, but other things happen: death, disability, partnership disagreements, the 4Ds. The 4Ds that the M&A guys and the lawyers like to hear about, because those are guaranteed legal expenses and transactions. But you should be aware of any buy-sell agreements. If there's not a buy-sell agreement and everybody's healthy and getting along, perfect time to suggest you put one in place, because it affects all the other employees, settling bank obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So again, CFO or controller, you should be aware of all that. You should be able to anticipate that. Let's talk about other things that everything's going, quote, okay. You've survived COVID. You got your PPP. You've filed for your ERC and you're keeping your head above water. But all of a sudden you're looking at, we got some major CapEx coming up and we just failed our covenants for 2 years in a row. We're going to have to go out and refinance this business and it's not looking pretty. So what does that mean? They might have to bring in a private equity firm or a mezz firm to shore up the financing. So that's expensive money, but it's also very, very likely some kind of a loss of total control. And those situations half the time, lead to an exit. Either the mezz firm or the hawkish lenders, the one step away from loan shark lenders, start to demand guarantees, and one owner or both owners say, I've had it, I've been doing this 30 years, I'm selling. So again, you should be able to see or sense those. If you're looking at a refinancing and you start looking at private banks and mezz funds and private equity firms, do your homework to understand if these guys are vultures or just expensive lenders. Figure out their reputation. The owner, the board is looking for a lifeline. Sometimes the guys throwing the lifelines are not what they appear to be. Been there, done that. Other indicators, the competitors are selling, the industry is consolidating. Either it's consolidating to a number one or number two position competitor, or it's being consolidated by a third party, such as a PE firm. Because when that happens, one of two things happen. You either approach them and figure out if your strategy is compatible and you work out a high value deal, or you get an unsolicited offer delivered by a shark. And they start to gain scale, they start to gain power, and all of a sudden you wind up selling for asset value instead of 5 or 6 or 7 times EBITDA. So there's almost always no good news here in an exit. It may be driven by, the perfect international buyer wants a foothold in your market in the US, where you've got great little niche technology, or a great set of customers where there's scale and synergies for somebody else and you can negotiate a great exit. But those are rare. And I'll even jump to the conclusion that at least half the time the CFO doesn't survive those marriages. So all of a sudden, the exit comes up, you work really, really hard under a lot of stress for a year or two, going through an exit, and then your job's eliminated the day of closing, 90 days after closing, or a year after closing, and you're a victim. So to some degree, if it's totally blindsided you as the CFO, you probably don't deserve to keep your job, and you are a victim, as harsh as that is to say. So let's come back to, you've got a 50-50 ownership, or you've got a 3 or 4-way ownership. Everybody's got slightly different stages in life, situations in life. You know what your owners are about. If their kids are out of college, if they're downsizing, if they want to move to the beach, if the wife wants to do whatever. Keep your ears open, because you hear enough of that. They're talking when they're out to lunch, just the owners. They're talking to their lawyers or their buddies about, let's sell this company for 10 and walk away with 10 or $20 million. And I've never heard anybody on a golf course or the country club saying, I should have gotten more from my company. No, I just sold it for 7 times EBITDA, and I walked away with 5 or 10 million. And I got $10 million more than my bank debt. I walked away with $10 million. Well, the numbers geeks on this call understand things like capital gains and loan payoffs, et cetera, that the owners don't always understand, or they never brag about, because they walked away with 2 million, but they want to tell all their golf buddies that they walked away with 10 million. If you've never sensed that, you're hanging around with a bunch of honest people that don't have competitive friends. So just part of my skepticism always leaks through. So now you start to sense that there's an exit in the next 2 or 3 years that I'm going to come back to. If you think this is going to happen in 2 or 3 years, so I'm going to paint the scenario. You're the 45 or 50-year-old CFO or controller, and the owners are 60 to 65. It's pretty clear to me that they're going to sell before you retire, and you need to start thinking about it. So what do? First of all, learn what's involved in the sale. Learn the information that's going to be requested. It's not just the last 3 years of your audited statements. It's going to be what's known as a data room. And the data room usually has 15 to 20 components. We have a session on creating a data room, and you're going to see stuff in there that it's quote, hey, it's not my job. But end of the day, it is your job to create a data room. And what I'm suggesting is you create a data room now in your spare time, where you just look at the 15 item checklist and say, hey, all 15 of these apply to our company. I should be conversant with these. We should have this information in one place, clean data that we can use to not only run the business smarter, better, faster, but also in the event of an unsolicited offer or a lawsuit or a death following, a situation following the death of a partner, we have everything in one place. So create the checklist. They exist. We can share one with you. Start to organize the documents. More importantly, start to organize and figure out, do we even have this information someplace? I'm not going to go into detail. I'm glad to one-on-one. We go through the checklist, but some of the stuff will surprise you. Gather information you need. Some of it's very simple for us to do. 3 years, the last 3 audit reports. Okay. And oh, by the way, if you had a restatement for 2018, make sure you use the 2019 auditor's report and use the prior year off the 2018. I don't care if 2018 was audited, you had a restatement. So a buyer is going to look for 3 years of consistent data in a minimum. Don't confuse them by having your own documents that disagree with each other. The fact that you can explain them doesn't make you look smart. It makes you look dumb. So 3 years of financial statements, including bank statements, loan statements, OSHA, I'll go back to our earlier topic, OSHA 300, 301s, 5,500 forms for your benefit costs. Don't tell them what your benefit costs were, hey, they're on the income statement, show them the 5,500 report. Don't tell them that our safety record's been pretty good. Show them the 300 report, have it backed up by the 301 report. And the 301 report includes a 1-page or so summary for each claim, each expense. So if you're going to show the 300 and you had 7 claims last year, you better have 7 backups for that year's 301. And you better have notes on there. This file was closed. There was, the final adjusted cost was this, that the employee came back to work or whatever happened, so that when they ask questions, you have the answers already prepared. Best advice I ever had in my life was present the information so at the end of the financial review, there are no questions. Some people say, I'll present this and I'll field the questions. I'm going to look like I'm really smart. If your board has to ask a lot of questions each month and each quarter and during the budget, they have to ask questions. You've done a lousy job of providing and presenting the information. So that was something I learned the hard way 15, 20 years ago. So again, create the data room. And I would even go to the point is create a Dropbox. On your own hard drive, create a Dropbox where you just organize this and drop the data in. And you may not have 3 years of history for renewed contracts or canceled contracts or something else. You may not have it easily. So maybe you have the last 2 years and you accumulate it. And now when you close the books next year and you come back to your Dropbox next February or March after year end's done, you drop in your tax returns, you drop in the audit reports, you drop in your board package, and then you go back and say, yeah, I need to go back and tune this up because I only had 2 years in the file. It's a lot easier to do when you're not being pressed to do it by an attorney, by a widow, or by a bunch of angry shareholders. Again, why do we do this? If you're a good CFO, you're looking through the windshield, not the rear view mirror. So you're visionary, you're always prepared. In fact, you're over prepared, you're organized. It's interesting that when you have a data room and all of a sudden you go out for a refinancing and bankers want to see some information that's kind of unique to them for whatever reason, if they ask you about your backlog and your conversion rates and who your top 20 customers are, in 5 minutes, your top 20 customers for the last 5 years, and you can answer their question intelligently and not guess. Same thing for reviewing insurance coverage, workers' comp coverage, D&O coverage. You're going to have all your claims information, whether it was a claim and it was disputed or refuted. You're going to have all that information. And again, you're going to be the smartest person in the room. And that's what you should be, because you have the information. You'll also find gaps. You're going to learn more about your company by doing a data room than you'll learn by closing the books every month and going through the routine. So yeah, it's a little extra work. Frankly, I would do this without telling my boss or the board I'm creating a Dropbox and a data room. It's just a good practice to have. And you really don't need to get anybody's permission to organize your data, your information, in a logical, proactive way. Now let's talk about you've anticipated an exit. Now, what happens if the exit discussion starts? So if you don't take this approach, you may not have understood a stock sale versus an asset sale and the tax implications. You may not understand everything on your tax return for deferred taxes or some penalties if you pay off a loan early in the event of a change of control. You're going to, as you do the data room and you're looking at a loan document, you're going to glance at, does this have a prepayment penalty? Does this have a change in control, clause? But part of it is just, what's the company worth? It's not worth what your boss told you your competitor sold to, or what the car dealership down the street sold for. You're a distributor of machine parts. You can't compare yourself to the software company or the apartment complex or whatever else. You need to understand enterprise value, how it's calculated, and what the total value of the company is. And it's going to be a range, and just accept the fact you're going to be wrong with whatever you come up with, because part of it's in the eye of the beholder, even though you do the correct arithmetic for the correct sector. So you're going to have your high and your low. And then the obvious point is, okay, we're worth $20 million. Maybe we sell for a premium, get 21 million. Maybe it's comprised of cash and debt assumption and an earnout or a deferred payout. But end of the day, you're worth 20 to 21 million dollars. Now start to look at what you have to deliver to pay off your leased assets, to pay the bank debt, to pay off any obligations you have. So you get to a pre-tax gain. So all of a sudden your $21 million is $10 million net to shareholders. And they're all walking around like, I'm buying an island, I got $10 million. And you need to know the tax basis calculations so that you temper them, but that 10 million becomes 6 million, split three ways. $2 million each sounds like a lot of money, but not if you're 57, 58, 59 years old and are not ready for retirement. So a lot of work just to understand the options and to get some idea of what the company is worth top line and after the transaction. Okay. So now a lot of closed door meetings, a lot of anxiety, whether it's, again, the death of an owner, the divorce of an owner, serious illness, a buy-sell agreement in place or not in place. Even if the buy-sell agreement's there, you still have to do all the work to determine the value. One party wants it high, one party wants it low. It's going to be, whether it's a divorce, it's going to feel like a divorce settlement. You're caught in the middle. You have to be objective. You have to be data driven. But let's say you decide to exit. And let's say that you decide to take it to market, which means you probably have to engage a sell side advisor, a broker. That's a whole different, summary discussion. And we've done sessions on that. But now somebody has to write the one-page teaser. Company in the northeastern part of the country, market leader in this kind of technology, management team in place, 20 years of history, good safety record. We can't make that crap up. You have to have the facts backing it up. Ergo the data room. Number two is now you have the one pager. Before you send the one pager out through your advisor, because they can't write it about your company. They can collect your grammar and correct your vocabulary in your marketing words, but you need the data. It's going to come from you. Okay. Then you have to create a 10 or 20 page pitch deck where you show income statement history and forecast, where you show balance sheet, where you show strengths and weaknesses, market assessments, competitor assessments, technology assessments. And as the CFO, you're probably the person writing, or at least pulling together that entire pitch deck. And then you still get to pay the broker $25,000 or $50,000 to review it and have it on the shelf in case a potential buyer wants to see it. So going to slide 16, you've thought about this, you've created the data room, you've gotten a little smarter about the valuations. And let's come back to my example. You've got a $5 million company, the multiples are 4 to 5 at EBITDA. And really your clean EBITDA is 5.5 million. So now you're at the point the business is worth 23 to $27 million. Well, it doesn't take a math genius to figure out for every dollar of costs I reduce now, it might be worth $4 or $5 to the sellers. So if I can increase sales, increase utilization of the factory, fill out the second shift, sell a little bit more, reduce overtime, reduce costs, raise prices. This is the one time in your life where you can stop reporting results and start to increase the value of the company. You can't do this if you're surprised and pulling together a data room and finding out the business is really worth $20 million. I wish we would have done the cost savings programs. I wish we would have reduced our healthcare costs. I wish we would have paid attention on our safety bill and reduce our safety expenses $200,000-$300,000 a year, because all that 200,000 becomes $1 million to $1.5 million of value. Let me explain why I made that comment. You've got an EBITDA multiple of 5. If you improve your baseline EBITDA by 200,000 times 5 is $1 million increase in enterprise value. What if all of a sudden you're the best in the industry, bar none, that all of a sudden you deserve a premium? So all of a sudden you're a really good company from standpoint of safety, from a standpoint of few of your contracts turn over, a few of your employees turn over, you start to have metrics that are upper quartile. All of a sudden, your multiple goes from 5 to 6 or even 7. So all of a sudden now, instead of adding $500,000 of value, you've added $500,000 of value plus another 1 point on the 2 million of EBITDA. So all of a sudden, the company is worth $24 to $29 million because you're improving the P&L, but you're also improving the multiple. The multiplier effect, no pun intended, the multiplier effect of whether you're a 5, 6, 7 multiple is enormous. Now, why would I do that? Maybe you have a phantom stock offering. Maybe you ought to negotiate in the event. So we're doing a buy-sell agreement. We're doing a change of control agreement. You've been there 4 or 5 years. You're showing that you're a smart CFO and you're adding value and you've got a plan. You want to get a clause somehow because you don't have any leverage on this. You want to negotiate a clause that in the event you guys sell the company, I can either bail up front. I don't want to do that, but I have to look out for my next 10 or 15 years of employment. But I can either bail now, or I will do my absolute best now, during, and after a sale to optimize the value, reduce the risk, and make sure this goes smoothly. But I need to somehow get paid for that. Either I'm a phantom 3% owner or 2% owner, or I got $100,000, or I got a 1-year severance check. Those are not unreasonable asks for a CFO. So if you have two 50-50 owners who are willing to sell the business for $20 million and pay a boatload of taxes, okay? But if you do your job optimizing valuation and minimizing the tax impact, all of a sudden that $10 million cash in their pocket turns into $14 or $15 million of cash in their pocket. Don't you deserve $500,000 from each? And you can make it a pay for performance clause, but you better know what you're talking about. Then other things to think about. Anticipate ways to increase value, reduce costs. Also, think about a transition plan. Think about what are the problems we have now. Well, the uncle is our sales director, but he really doesn't do a very good job, but nobody's going to fire him. Well, you know what? You're going to state in your adjustments, you don't need a director of sales. You got a VP of sales, but the director is Uncle Johnny. Do yourself a favor, get rid of Uncle Johnny now. Because if you're paying him $200,000, he's probably costing you another $200,000. Don't rely on the buyer to fix management's problems. Deal with the ugly situation, the elephant in the room, and just say, we'll have buyers. Brokers will tell you this. Buyers and sellers will tell you this. We don't want to come in and clean up what you told us you should have cleaned up, but you didn't have the stomach to do it. If you're telling us you should have fired Uncle Johnny, what else haven't you done that you haven't told us? And you'll have buyers walk away. Other part is it's the right thing to do to run a business efficiently. You see the stupidity. Another one is, oh yeah, we're going to run the summer home, the airplane, and the boat through the company, and we'll just adjust out those as add backs. You get all those distraction add backs, some buyers will walk away. It's like, were they running a country club and managing their kids' education and their hobbies and their sports cars through the company, or were they running a manufacturing company? It turns off a lot of buyers. It turns stock sales into asset sales, and it makes the lawyers rich, and it gives you gray hair. So some things to anticipate and start to clean up now. Other actions on slide 17. If you currently have compiled financials, move to a review. A review has some credibility. If you're currently reviewed and you think you're exiting in 3 or 4 years, spend the money to get audited statements. Okay, makes your job a lot easier. If the CPA firm goes through the motions and does a soft, cheap job on either the reviews or you do the tax returns yourself, pay somebody to do the tax returns, get 3 years of clean tax history. Get them done by the same firm. Don't use a tax firm separate than your cheaper local accountant. Get to a regional firm at a minimum, not the guy that does shoe repair and tax returns. Keep everything current. If you have audits, if you have open items, or revised returns, clean them up that way. If you've got bad receivables or bad inventory in your balance sheet, take the reserves off, do the write-off, do the right thing. You can always reclass them back in if you find a way to salvage that inventory. But get your balance sheet clean. Obviously receivables, obviously inventory, old M&E, get it off the books. Get the owner's assets off the books. It's painful, but you need to explain why. Slide 18, reduce the owner's expenses. Don't play games, because again, you probably want to do a stock sale. The buyer doesn't want to do a stock sale if they've got any tax implications. The lawyer will say, the sellers will say, I'm indemnifying you, and the buyer's going to say, I don't want to go through a tax audit when you're gone, and I have to sue you to get that $1 million of taxes and interest and penalties. I just don't want the distraction. So if your tax books aren't absolutely clean, get them clean. Again, make the hard cost decisions, get rid of the brother-in-law or the whoever. Clean up your org charts and start to develop your management successors. Okay. Document business process wherever possible. Set it up so that it's very easily understood. If a buyer wants to integrate it or leave it stand alone, create a business process, black belt, 5S program, and in the next year or two, get everything documented. You'll find the savings. Employees will appreciate it. Next slide, educate yourself. Understand data rooms, understand structures, understand add backs, understand the process of buying and selling a company. A letter of intent doesn't mean much. An NDA doesn't mean much. Okay. So be careful the way you handle information. Be careful when you stop talking to potential buyers and falling in love with one potential buyer, because it takes 5 or 10 interested parties to close one transaction. Okay. And then, like I mentioned before, but I'll say it again and again, understand the tax impact of a transaction, how it's structured, what their basis is, what the sellers are going to owe. Because at the end of the day, what's the cash to the sellers is the crucial item. Wrapping up here, have an operating plan, document your business processes, have an up-to-date employee handbook, clean up your asset side, whether they're leased or owned. Don't keep old crap on the books. If the lease has been paid off, make sure that's documented and you have the titles. Understand your facility leases, understand what happens in change of control. You might want 2 or 3 year leases and pay a little premium if you're going to sell in 2 or 3 years, because a buyer may not want to be stuck with your location, and you might want to negotiate a lease that is a 5-year lease, but you have a 3-month penalty if there's a change of control. And you just again, I want the flexibility. I'm willing to pay for it. It's easier to negotiate it when you don't need it than when the buyer says, I want to buy your business, but I don't want these 3 leased locations, and you're stuck with an ironclad obligation for 2 or 3 more years. So start to think ahead, start to think out of the box. Again, look at employee contracts. You might want to have some success or golden handcuffs. You might want to have some quasi-equity programs for your management team, and stop being so cheap and pave the way for a good sale. Again, a sale at a 6 times multiple is a hell of a lot more valuable, much easier to sell a premium product with a management team in place and good agreements in place. Buyers will pay 10 to 20 to 30% more for a company that's going to transition very easily. Wrapping up here, I appreciate your patience. A lot more information on our website. We also have examples of how the CFO can look like an absolute hero to both the sellers and the buyer and the CPA firm. So if you want to continue working after this with the buyer, you look like a smart person they want to put on the payroll and treat you correctly for responsibility and compensation. If you impress the CPA firm, you wind up being victim to that. There's always firms looking for experienced CFOs, and the CPA firm can be your best advertising, or you wind up consulting for them. So in conclusion here today, lot of information on our website on these topics today and on other topics. And our next session tentatively planned for Wednesday, July 20th, same time. And we're going to look at some of the best practices in healthcare. My thought is that most of you are going to be doing a healthcare renewal come October. So I want to start to cover some healthcare topics in each of our sessions in July, August, and September. Paul, with that, I'll take a breath. Any chat questions? I've neglected to ask that during this rambling.
We're good in the chat.
Any comments, questions you have?
I'll just say a thought that crossed my mind with what you were sharing about getting some of this stuff set up pre-transaction. I've had the chance to work with some PE firms that bring us in post-transaction, because in their analysis, or when they make the purchase, they see the opportunity to quickly make the company more profitable by cutting their employment costs, their healthcare costs in our area of expertise.
Sure. And it's much easier to bring you in, get those changes done within months than to pay me 5x for lowering my healthcare costs 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've had, and you know this, Paul, you know our company well, we've had a step change reduction in our healthcare costs. Our healthcare costs are down over 50% from when we bought the company 8 years ago, even with inflation. And so nobody's going to wring a dollar out of our healthcare costs. But at the end of the day, it's a very good plan. Our employees love it. It's very generous, yet it's very affordable, and the risk is managed very, very well. So it makes us, and we are best in class. And all disclosure, my firm is up for sale now. And I've been through all of these. I've got more gray hair. Some of these are very, very near and dear to my heart. Some of these learnings I didn't know a year and a half ago. I knew a lot of them. I can still get better. But one area where we've been complimented is that our employee handbook, our procedures, our process, our healthcare costs are upper quartile. So I'd rather have them pay me and then put it in their pocket as a synergy. So good close. We'll set it up for July 20th. Same time, same place, same channel. And in the meantime, to folks still online, check out our website and give me a buzz if I can help you.
Thanks as always, Gary.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, folks. Take care.
Bye-bye.